All right, what is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Mets Weekly Podcast. We are live at this very moment on YouTube and on X to recap this week's Mets versus Athletics series. But before we get into that, I just want to remind everybody to hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Uh, and also, make sure to put on those post notifications to not miss the live recordings of this podcast, which go up on Thursdays and on Sundays, depending on how these series even out. We usually go live after every single one of them to recap them. For those of you in the live chat right now, we want to let you guys know that we love reading your comments, your questions, your concerns, any single thought that you have on this team in the comments section below. And if you feel like you're being ignored, you're not being ignored. You're just being starred throughout the show. We'll pull up as many as we can throughout the show to keep the flow of the conversation going. Also, remember to follow Mets Weekly on X and on TikTok, which mainly features my co-host, who is on the screen right now, Frank, his instant reactions following every single Mets game, titled the Mets Frankly Post Game. Also, make sure for our audio listeners to follow us on all of your favorite listening platforms to not miss the audio version of these episodes that go up at 9 a.m. the following day that they are recorded. So let's get into episode number 74. The Mets are coming off of a series with the Oakland Athletics, a team that they probably should have beaten, probably should have swept, probably should have won this series. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that I was in attendance for this last game, and I can honestly say, first I'll get your opinions on it, Frank, because obviously you haven't talked 2 minutes in here. But I'm ready to explode. I think I'm ready. That we're getting into territory that is very, very dangerous in the playoff picture, as well as just the Mets in general, where they should be beating these teams, and they're not.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is not the first team with a big time losing record that the Mets have lost a series to. So I feel like that's kind of something that's building is that it's like, oh, well, you know what? They just had a bad series. It's okay. The fact that they just haven't been playing all that great these past couple of weeks also hurts it. But then the thing that really just kind of puts it over the top is seeing how well San Diego and Arizona continue to play. And while the Braves have been kind of that's like the Mets' only chance, only hope right now is to catch the Braves because the Padres and Diamondbacks are running away with it. And there may be a scenario pretty soon where all of a sudden one of those teams overtakes the Dodgers in the West, and now the Dodgers are in the wild card race. So it's just been a lot of different things all going wrong at the same time for the Mets. So it's one thing like, you know what, if they're playing bad, losing a series to a bad team, that's one thing. But when it's happened multiple times now, and you've been playing bad, and these other teams are playing well, it just feels like so many things right now are going wrong for them. And then when you have a game like yesterday, just with so much craziness, whether the Mets, yeah, they obviously played bad, but just with guys not touching home plate and balls bouncing in front of home plate and hitting guys in the shin, and now he's out. Like, it was just so much. And I saw it was posted that that was the longest game since the pitch clock has been instituted with a pitch clock in 9 innings. And it's because they just decided to continue walking the bases loaded or hitting a guy with the pitch. Like, it was just so many things that we've talked about for a long time now. And something that I want to go very long on about the walks. We've been talking about this all year, but it just felt like yesterday it hit like its ultimate point where it's just like, okay, this is crazy. Like, this is just absolutely unacceptable. It is just not going to work out if you're doing that. So it was just a lot. This whole series was just crazy, you know, because it's just, and a lot of times it's that range of emotions. So it's like you get blown out in the first game, Blackburn gets beat up finally, then you bounce back 9-1. It's like, okay, we're good now. And then you have just a crazy game like yesterday, which they're lucky it's a 1-run loss with the A's stranding the bases loaded 3 times. Like, it was just one of, if not the most crazy series of the whole year.
They they asked for it. They asked to lose this series. I mean, this has been constant something that has gone on since the All-Star break, whether you're talking about the Angels, whether you're talking about the Rockies, which I believe they did win that series, with the Marlins, and now you have the A's. And I mean, Seattle, of course, is an actual contender. But when you're actually talking about a series like this against a team you should be beating, at the end of the day, whether you want to talk about the Marlins or Angels or the A's, none of them won those series. The Mets freaking lost. The Mets lost all of them. They did it to themselves. I don't want to hear any curses of people who are throwing out the first pitch. I don't want to hear any, somebody jinxing us on Twitter. We all know who it is. I'm not going to give them the time of day. I don't want to hear it. They lost. They're the ones who are losing. It's not the teams that are spoiling them, because the Mets are giving these teams every single chance possible to take it from them. That last game, I was in attendance for 3 hours and 45 minutes on full blast. The full-on walk problems. They walked 11 batters. They hit a batter. In total in this game, in that game, it was 17 walks, 3 hit by pitches, and I did the math. 425 total pitches were thrown in that game. How's that possible? How is that possible? And I was great to be in attendance for that. Let's just say that I actually wanted to pull my hair out. I really did. I've talked about Jose Quintana before and how he's just so boring to watch. The guy took it as a challenge. He actually took it as a challenge. He saw me in attendance. He actually looked at me. He said, "Watch this." I have been to. I'm not very close to Citi Field. It takes me let's say, I don't know, 2 hours to get down there. It's really rough to get down there. I'm in upstate New York, so I only go to about 2 games a year. So I don't have that big of a sample size to go off of. But that was the worst game I think I've ever gone to in my life. That was actually the worst game I've ever seen. And I have gone to 2013 Mets games. I have gone to 2012 Mets games. I have gone to ones where they have been blown out, but they actually did make a comeback, their usual fake comeback or something. I have seen ones where the bullpen has blown it, but then they walked it off. This was the worst baseball game I think I've ever attended in my life. And I'm not even exaggerating it. I also went to a Marlins versus Orioles series once when they were both the worst teams in baseball. That was a better game than this one. That's how pathetic this game was. Long. No, I don't think there was a single 1, 2, 3 inning on both sides. One of the worst games I've ever been to. Now, let's talk about the entire series, because I do want to get into it, of the events that happened these last 3 games. This one started off as rough as it possibly can. Paul Blackburn faces his old team, and he completely disintegrates. 4 innings pitched, six hits, gave up 6 earned runs, 1 unearned, was walking batters at the beginning there, couldn't get any swings and misses. The Mets tried to stage a comeback, but it just was not enough whatsoever. They still could not drive some key pieces in, and they went 4 for 17 with runners in scoring position. Seems like a trend throughout at least 1 or 2 of the games in these series that they've had since the All-Star break. The second game, the Mets did bounce back. David Peterson gave you 6 and a third. Lots of balls put in play, which kept his pitch count low despite the 4 walks. You had a home run from Lindor. You had a home run from Alonso. You had a 4-hit game. A run batted in by Vientos. Pretty much everybody contributed to the offense, whether they got a hit or not. We got a run batted in by Nimmo on a sacrifice fly. Martinez had a hit. Winker had a hit. Bader came on as a pinch hitter. He got a hit from Alvarez. And then, of course, a walk by Gamble. He scored a run as well. The Mets won 9-1 to even up the series. The final game of this series, like I said, absolutely horrendous. 4 innings pitched from Jose Quintana, possibly one of the worst of his Mets career. 7 hits, tons of base runners, walked 4, only struck out 1. 2 home runs from Mark Vientos. I really feel bad for Mark Vientos because it all got overshadowed by this horrendous game. Run batted in by Luis Torrens. Lindor had another game where he got on multiple times. 2-hit game from Iglesias. Pinch hit single by Tyrone Taylor. McNeil had a hit. JD Martinez had a hit. But overall, the main highlight was the Mets pitching, which gave up 12 hits, lots of base runners, 11 walks, and a hit by pitch. Just an absolute disgusting, embarrassing game as to where they had it in their hand, up 5-0, and they lost. And the one thing that I will say about Jose Quintana, let me just say that I've never seen a pitcher in a performance just completely asked to get shelled more than Jose Quintana did yesterday. He loaded the bases 3 times in those 4 innings. Got out of it the first time with a good strikeout. Second time, barely got out of it by he missed the pitch right down the middle. Luckily, it was popped up or something, I think. Lazy fly ball. Then he loads the bases again. You're asking for it. And the funny thing about that, too, and I'll direct it right to you, is every single one of these loading the bases, they all came with 2 outs. They all came with 2 outs. Unbelievable. I've not seen the Mets play a baseball game that bad from the pitching side in a long time. And we've seen some ridiculous blow-ups.
Yeah, I think the other big piece of it too is, when you're talking about the walks in general, in this particular case, it's the fact of the team that you're playing. So, there is something to be said of like, if you're not facing great hitters, you have to attack. You cannot just be walking batters constantly and putting yourself in really bad situations. And that's where it really comes into play. Like you talked about how, like, listen, the other teams aren't beating the Mets. The Mets are beating themselves by loading up the bases for Oakland, by giving them all these opportunities with the walks. And that's just what's so frustrating, is that when you look up and down this A's lineup, and this is without Brent Rooker in the last couple of games, who was on paternity leave. So it's like you have just a lot of guys who, and then also Shea Langler is not the best catcher in baseball, but other than that, you have a lot of guys who just aren't all that great. And the fact that you're walking all of them is really crazy. But then let's go a step further. You want to say Quintana had a bad game? Sure, he did.
Oh,
he had a really bad game. But here's the thing that really drives me nuts, is that the Mets used so many different pitchers in this game, and they all did the same thing. They were walking everybody too. They're throwing wild pitches. They're doing the same thing. So it's like, oh, you want to blame Quintana, and you should. But it's like the entire team. And this, when I criticize Jeremy Hefner, this is what I point to. When you have so many different guys who have the same exact struggles, at some point you have to look at coaching. Because it's not like these guys have a lack of talent. If these were a bunch of bum pitchers, I'd be like, fine. These guys stink. No pitching coach could fix them. But by all accounts, these are guys that have had success for the most part. Yeah. Huskar Brazaban, everyone's talking about, oh, look at that baseball savant page. Oh, he's got good stuff. Oh, he's going to be a great addition. Great. Ryan Stanek, a guy we've talked about for so long, has had success in this league in the big moments. He'll be fine. He's walked the ballpark. I think I was looking at his walks per night as a Met. I think it's like 9. It's something insane. Like, they just walk everybody once they become a Met. Phil Maton, another guy who's been good in the past, walking the ballpark. Reed Garrett, he was at first a good story.
That's what Reed Garrett does.
He went back to being not that great. Diaz walked a batter, and it's just crazy to me. And when you look at the entire Mets roster, when you look at all of their pitchers, both starters and relievers, almost nobody has a below 3 walk per 9. Most of these guys are in the 4s, they're in the 5s, and again, it's so many different pitchers that I can't just blame the players for everything. At some point,
No.
I've got to look at the coaching and saying, what is going on here? Because it goes both ways. It goes in the sense of like, okay, you have someone like Ryan Stanek or Braziban who was good before they got to Mets. Now they come to Mets and they're having struggles. But what I've also talked about so much is all these players that were with the Mets, then go somewhere else and now have success. Like, there is a common factor here. And it's just that the Mets pitching development or coaching has just not been all that great if these are the results that are happening. And right now, it just feels like, who could you really use? So many guys are struggling. I mean, even somebody like Jose Budo, I thought was having a good year. He's at a 4.5 walks per 9. So, he's been great in the bullpen and everything. But how does that translate when we're talking about walks per 9 in a bigger sample size of more innings? That's still like a lot of jams that you're probably going to have to work out if you're walking so many batters. So I just don't understand why he's gotten so much of a pass and why executives around the league now view him as a potential GM candidate or something.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. Yeah.
I have to be missing something here because, I mean, what I'm watching, and what I see before the players get here, after the players leave, what's happening on the field, I just can't feel all that confident in the Mets coaching when I'm seeing just so many guys have these struggles. And again, against a team like Oakland, this is so unacceptable. If you're walking Aaron Judge, I'm not going to complain because it's probably a good move. But when you're walking a lot of these guys that a lot of people probably haven't heard of before, that's a big issue. And I just feel like this is something that, like we said, has been going on all year. And we thought that, maybe there'd be some improvements, but this was probably the worst of all of them, honestly. When you're looking at the competition and just the amount of pitchers, like every single pitcher that pitched for the Mets yesterday, you had, was it 6 different pitchers? All of them at least walked one batter, but a lot of them walked multiple batters.
Some of them not even known for doing that.
Yeah, so it's just absolutely crazy. I mean, just in every aspect, it's really gotten out of hand at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we even have seen Paul Blackburn start to walk a few batters, quite a few, and he is known for not even walking anyone.
And that's what I'm saying. How come all of a sudden, when they become a Met, now they have walk problems? How is that? How is it that all these guys, this happens?
Not to mention, usually guys who throw a little bit harder, they kind of lack off the control a little bit. You also see the Mets dip in velocity too. Every time they come to the Mets, I'm like, oh well, this guy can touch 100. First pitch coming in, 94. Where the hell did that come from? And listen, even regards to velocity, we even have seen them, kind of tone it down a little bit just to keep some of these guys healthy, which is fine, especially when you have good pitch shape, which I like to talk about all the time. But the problem that we continue to experience is that the same issues that have gone on through 120 games this year, this was even a problem last year. This was a problem, I mean, I don't know if you want to count like 2022, eventually, just from the bullpen in 2022, this was a big issue. Not in the rotation because they actually had guys with decent control. But for some reason, there always seems to be, with this pitching staff, there always seems to be a minimization with skills. Never seems to be a maximization. There may be a few gems hidden there where like Reed Garrett had a good stretch. But when you bring it in, who have the Mets ever had like a guy they brought in externally be good for like consecutive years? Like actually show these skills on the actual diamond consistently? No. And listen,
the hope is that it's Nunez,
Mets,
but that's about it.
Yeah, Danel Nunez, exactly. And then he's only been here for 1 year as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So
we
knows
don't know
how
what it's going to look like. First of all, we don't know what it's going to look like once he comes back from injury, and then what happens the next year. And this is not true because he was actually better with Tampa Bay. No, he was literally maybe the best.
Well, he was good for us last year, But he's
But, I
gotten
mean,
hurt as
you
well.
can't-
We've also seen we saw that's the thing. That's another thing with Jeremy Hefner. We also have seen a lot of guys get hurt under him too.
I mean, you can't take credit for Brooks Raley when Brooks Raley was phenomenal before he got here. I mean, that's just like when we talk about like development, it's like improvement. You know, that's not what's happening here.
I just don't understand what is the fascination with him. I don't get it. I never will.
don't know.
And let me ask this question constantly. The Mets have gone through a lot of pitchers. They've gone through a lot of pitching turnover. We're not talking about position players because we've seen them DFA guys, keep guys too long, whatever. With the pitching, they have gone in and out of guys, even with Stearns here or with Stearns not here. We have seen them go through a ton of bullpen arms, be reinvented. I mean, the only guy from 5 years ago still here is Edwin Diaz. Like, we have not had that many like solidified pieces of the bullpen, which again, not much consistency comes from that that position. And that is definitely something that is established throughout the entire league. That's not just the Mets' problem. But the problem here is that guys continue to tailspin, guys continue to flood in and out. Guys have, let's say, I don't know, a good 9 outing stretch, then they fall off, then they come in here and they don't even belong here, and they shouldn't even be here. They have cycled through all levels of types of arms. Guys who have had success before, guys who have not, guys with upside, guys with no upside. They have cycled through all pitchers, especially through the bullpen, even in the rotation. We have a completely different rotation besides like Senga and Quintana this year, which Quintana didn't even pitch that much last year. Out of all of this in the last 4 years since Cohen took over, 2021, 2022, 23, and 24, what hasn't changed? Tell me one thing that hasn't changed. Frank, I know you know the answer.
Yeah, I mean,
what hasn't changed?
Jeremy Hefner.
Jeremy Hefner is still here.
And it's not so much Cohen. It's like I've also talked about that they've had so many different guys run the Mets since Cohen's taken over. Like, I mean, you've had Sandy, you had Porter, you had Scott, you've had you've had Stearns. Like, you've had so many different like baseball minds just like all retain this guy. So that, like, there has to be something. Yeah, like, I mean, for all these guys, especially someone like Stearns, who like, that's the thing that also really kind of bothers me is Stearns like known for his pitching acumen. And, you know, right now in Milwaukee, they were talking about it, but they've had so many different guys make starts for them. So many different guys make saves for them, yet are still one of the best teams in the whole National League now with Stearns not there. So it's like Stearns just known for like building pitching. So you would think that like someone who knows pitching so well would have like a really strong pitching coach and be like, oh no, Jeremy Hefner's okay. Like I could still have him. Like, yeah. I'm just not seeing it. Like, I don't, I'm not seeing especially just in results. I mean, and the other thing that I always go back to, like I say in the group chat all the time, or I tweet about all the time, is that when I'm seeing the really young catcher in Francisco Alvarez doing the mound visits and not Jeremy Hefner, and even the times when Jeremy Hefner does come out there, it feels like he's not saying much. It's like, that's where I just don't see, when you talk about pitching coach, that's where I just don't see the actual coaching part of it. Is that, okay, obviously the pitcher is doing something wrong, but how are you helping them make that adjustment? Like, that's something that I'm just not seeing it with my own 2 eyes. And again, maybe there's stuff I'm missing behind the scenes. Like, there has to be, because I just don't understand how, like you said, how this has been the one mainstay despite all the struggles and just, you know, all the different guys that have come in and out. And I would think that, like, the success of, you know, whoever's name you want to throw out there, Seth Lugo, whoever, like, seeing how well they do outside of the organization. How about Austin Adams shutting down the Mets after they let him go and doing a whole celebration? Like, you see so many guys come through, step up, they're not with the Mets anymore. I feel like that's really what's more indicative.
And I feel like it's really rapidly increased since Hefner's been here. Like, I do remember a lot of guys kind of like flaming out when, was it before 2020, before he was here, a lot of guys would like maybe have a little bit mild success and then they would flame out. Now it is like on full display. Like, we are seeing a lot of former Mets pitchers have success before they come here or having success after they leave, which is concerning. And even the guys who, like, I don't know, do have success here under Jeremy Hefner or maybe have their career year under Jeremy Hefner, there still is just a little bit, of doubt as to where can they actually keep this consistency, because there hasn't really been anybody who can really just solidify like some kind of pitching sequence, some kind of pitching, like working around the strike zone. This whole thing has just been so exhausting. I feel like for some reason they're so like scared to give up home runs that they don't even like think about the strike zone whatsoever. And the problem that I have with this is I think that Jeremy Hefner, in theory, has good pitching approaches or good pitching philosophies. I do think that's what I do think that is something that can be established, because there is a lot of mixes and pitch repertoires and things that they've added to a lot of these guys, whether it's per the pitching lab or per Jeremy Hefner or something. They're on the right track in theory. But the problem is that you have had so many issues executing it under Jeremy Hefner for multiple years now. This is not just this year. This is last year, the year before, and it's just not getting the job done. It's good, and I think it's good in theory what they do. But for some reason, they have not been able to execute it. And where you're constantly seeing this trend of guys dip in velo, dip in stuff, give up more home runs in their career with the Mets than anybody else, walk of the ballpark. We can establish this as when you have a trend going on, how long until you kind of ease it off the players and Jeremy Hefner is held accountable? Because I'm not seeing any accountability for him. I'm seeing a lot from, the analysis of Carlos Mendoza. When Carlos Mendoza says, oh, well, we can't walk that many batters, we got to make these adjustments. Who's making those adjustments then? Because we're not seeing a difference every single night. And this is not talking about April woes or in May. We are in August now. We are 120 games into the season, and this is still continue to be an issue. And even when that isn't an issue, they still continue to just like screw and just constantly screw up as to where you have some of these guys leaving things over the plate, trying to force the strike zone. You just never have any balance whatsoever in the heads of these pitchers. And they just have not been able to execute it. Shamanaya, we have seen him have a career-high walk rate and struggle with walks. Never was doing that before he came here. Luis Severino, even though he's a little bit different of a pitcher than he was with the Yankees, he's walked quite a few batters as well. And even this guy, the only guy who's pitched well under Jeremy Hefner. What is something that David Peterson really struggles to do to get deep into games? Walking batters.
He has the highest
Jose
walk
Quintana.
rotation.
Jose Quintana starts walking guys now. Someone who's known for having
which he
pinpoint
used
command.
to not do. Yeah,
used to not do that. Maybe that's something that goes on with him just being older now. Who knows? Carlos Carrasco started walking batters when he was
we
here.
Also did not do either.
Who also didn't do that?
For his control. Yeah.
I just feel like at some point you got to kind of narrow it down as to where if so many pieces are continuing to have this issue, and this is when we're talking about against an A's team. When you're going up against a Padres team, when you're going up against a Phillies team, if you walk the bases loaded, they're going to make you pay. They're not going to pop up. They're not going to strike out with the bases loaded every single time. You are not going anywhere in the postseason if you continue to walk batters like this. Never going to happen. Those little slight mistakes, those little margin for error mistakes, it all starts with a walk. I don't know how Mets fans, for any of those who actually do support Jeremy Hefner and think that he's a great pitching coach, I don't know how years before he was here, watch Jerry's Familia and not keep in mind that it all begins with a walk. That's how things will continue to just collapse. And you can tell me that, oh, well, most of these times they get out of it. Most of these times they get out of it. They're not going to in the postseason. They're not going to in September either, because they're going to be facing.
They're not going to make the postseason if they keep doing it. I mean, forget.
They're not going to make the postseason if they do that anyway. So it's probably going to be a moot point. I feel like there's some things that he just doesn't know how to apply whatsoever. And for some reason, it has to go out to coaching. I'm not saying there are some guys on here that shouldn't be here, or there's some guys who are just, the coach can't play for you, obviously. But there's been tons of mindset with the coaching that we've seen on full display. Some of it we haven't seen because it's behind closed doors. But for some reason, there's something really, really special about Jeremy Hefner. There's something really, really special about Eric Chavez and Jeremy Barnes. There's something really, really special. Coaching is a thing. You need it. You need leadership, or the thing goes haywire. Remember that leadership whole thing at the end of May when they were all struggling, and the leadership, the veteran leadership, the Lindor and JD Martinez, they stepped up, and then they turned it around. Leadership is important. I mean, at one point, how many times do we have to just kind of like flip the same coin? Chavez, Hefner, Barnes, Hefner, Barnes, Chavez. How many times do we have to flip this coin until we realize all three of these guys probably need to go because of these trends that continue to go? Not to mention the main thing that I really, really wanted to say off the top of my head at the very beginning when they hired David Stearns. Let him bring in his own guys. I don't know if he just listened to the wrong people or whatever, but this isn't working. And even if it does work, it doesn't get them to the place where they need to go. That's the problem. And I can talk about the hitting as well. With runners in scoring position, a lot of these guys who continue, they've been veterans, the bottom of the lineup still seeming to just cash guys in a lot better, and they're not supposed to be the main contributors on this team. And they make the lineup deeper, of course. But for some reason, I really just don't know. I don't know what angle to go at here, because I feel like with this roller coaster they've been on this year, where they were cold to start off April, they were hot, a little bit hot in May, June was great, July was half and half, now August they're just slogging through it. As to where we feel like we are shifting a lot of blame to whether it's a player, whether it's a coach. Manager continues to be ridiculed, of course, because it's the manager, of course, because they think everything is the manager's fault. Collectively as a unit, there always just seems to be holes with the Mets, and it doesn't seem like these problems to continue to be on full blast for other teams. For some reason, they constantly have this inconsistency, these inconsistent stretches, and no one's held accountable for some reason. Who does get held accountable for it? Because if you're talking about trends, if you're talking about individual performances, some guys have done good here, but there's been more bad than good with individual performances. When you start to see a trend, that's when you got to go above their head. For some reason, there is a lot of just lack of leadership at some points in this team. Whether you're talking about coaching, whether you're talking about veterans. I mean, we can even get into this. This is a whole other topic. After the game yesterday, JD Martinez saying, well, August is the toughest month in baseball. Excuse me? Like, JD Martinez, now he's gotten sucked up into the web of making excuses for this team, who has been one of the struggling bats in this stretch. Like, come on. I mean, at this point, I'm done with the excuses. I'm done with the, well, the A's have some talent. The A's have talent. They can hit. Well, yeah, they hit a lot of home runs. They got a lot of power on that team. Their main home run hitter didn't play for 2 of the games. When I say that with this stretch in August of teams that are not competitive, they're handing you the wild card on a silver platter, and they still can't get the job done. A silver platter. There's only one guy that I know takes advantage of the silver platter opportunities. I won't even get into that. But they're giving you this on a silver platter. There are teams ahead of you that are playing competitive teams. The teams you are playing, you should be beating 2 out of 3. At least. Some of them you should be sweeping. Is it really hard for me to say, is this a bad take to say that they are going to have a difficulty possibly playing the Chicago White Sox this year? Is it bad to, is it such an odd take to think that that's going to happen? As to where maybe they may be in danger of losing that series? Like, I really, and this is the whole thing. This is the reason as to why you play the games, of course. Every time I hear, this is every year. July, August, the Mets have the most easiest schedule. They have such a simple schedule. Excuse me? Have you seen this team play? You are never, and I mean never, going to be guaranteed a win. Ever with the Mets. That will never be a thing. No matter who the ownership is, who the manager is, whether what the personnel is, no matter what the lineup is, you are never guaranteed a win. There's another reason as to why. And when we were at this game yesterday, my dad even placed a bet on this game that there would be the over-under or whatever, over 8 runs. He got it, obviously. But I told him, I said, don't bet against the Mets. Don't bet on the Mets. It just will never, you're never going to have the outcome that you think is going to happen. And that's why I look at this with like pessimism and optimism as to where they have these pieces where they can get it done. But for some reason, they just can't find a way to execute it properly. And we're going to continue to have these same conversations every single time that they screw up like this. I'm done making excuses. They should be winning these games. We can dissect everything that went wrong. But at the end of the day, like I said, with all of these teams they've been facing, they're not beating us. The Mets are losing. They lose all by themselves. Anything else you want to add on that? It's just, I'm ready to explode. I really am. I'm just done. I've had it. Because we do this every single year.
Yeah, so just a couple of things. So last thing on the pitching side, the Mets have used 35 different pitchers this season. The only guys with walks per 9 under 3 are Christian Scott, injured, Daniel Nunez, injured, Kodai Senga, injured. One guy who also had walks under 3 was Michael Tonkin, who infamously is not a Met anymore, went and had success elsewhere. So it's just been, so when you have 35 guys and let's say 32 of them all have a bit of a walk problem like that, I mean, it's just hard for me to defend, like keep bashing players when you've had like 32 different guys have the same issue. Like that's more than an active roster. And if you go and have like, let's say 13 pitchers, that's like 3 rosters full of pitchers that you've had all have walk issues. Like that's just beyond an insane number. But I think the other thing too is when we talk about like don't bet on them to win, don't bet on them to lose. It's just because of just like how hot they can get, is particularly
Yeah.
offensively, and how cold they can get. Because, with Nimmo going into the All-Star game, we were talking about him being one of the absolute best left fielders in all of the National League. He was that good. But since the beginning of July, he's been one of the worst hitters in all
Yeah.
of Major League Baseball. Like, it's that drastic. It's not like, oh, he was pretty good, now he's a little. It's like, no, he went from amazing to awful. And then on the flip side, McNeil, the same thing happened to him in the positive way. We went from awful to good. And now, like we've talked so much about like Alvarez having the struggle and JD Martinez having the struggle. We know how inconsistent Alonso's been. Like, we've just seen so many guys just not doing what they were doing before. Like Iglesias, overall the numbers are still good, but he hasn't been as good. Luis Torrens has still been pretty good for the most part. The two guys that I really like, and now Bader's actually he's OPS plus now slipped under 100. So you're starting just to see like a lot of these guys kind of just come back down to earth, I guess you can say. But the two guys that are really the standouts for me as far as like having productive seasons, all in all, is Lindor and Vientos. I mean, those are the two guys that I'm looking at as like, what, these guys are having really good years when it's all said and done. I just feel like with Alonso, it looks like he might be waking up, but I feel like it's gonna be too little too late, honestly, because we talked about especially like when the opportunities were there. Like we talked so much about like he had so many plate appearances with runners in scoring position, didn't come through, and then in the games where the Mets score 9 runs and blow out a team, he has a 4-hit game or whatever. Like it just always seems that like, and there's stats like that for Lindor, for all you guys. Like it's a stat that makes sense, but it's like in wins versus losses. Like I'm sure there's like a big disparity for Alonso. I know there is for Lindor, but it makes sense. Like when your stars
that used
play
to not
well,
be the case. Let's not remember that.
it's
The
like
first 5 years that he was here, when they win, he hits.
yeah. So it's just it's really a frustrating just when you see that, and I think that's kind of where it's gonna really come down to, is that you would assume that Brandon Nimmo is going to get better, not be one of the worst hitters of baseball, maybe not one of the best, but going to be still a good player. And it's just like what kind of worries me going forward is that like even if some of these guys get hot again, how do I not know that the guys who are hot are now just going to get cold? And it's just very interesting that when they went on this huge run, like they had pretty much the whole team outside McNeil got red hot offensively, like the whole team. And it's just like that one big surge in June, and that kind of just decided everything for the fate of the team. You know what I mean? It's like, because I think of where they were before then. Like they were quite, like we're talking about quite a bit under 500, way out of the wild card race. Like that's where they were. They went crazy. They get into the wild card race, and now they're slowly starting to slip back out of it. And now their record is getting closer and closer to 500. So I just feel like I talked a few episodes before about maybe a different way we could approach the deadline. I just feel like this whole like throwing a parade that we didn't give up a top 15 prospect. Well, based off the guys you got, you shouldn't have given up a top 15 prospect, because all in all, the guys that you got, they help, but they're not amazing. Like they're okay players for the most part. So I just, it's tough when you have guys struggling. Adding just okay pieces aren't going to do much. And yes, most of the stars didn't get moved, but I just think all in all, like when you saw what happened yesterday with Quintana, like at the end of the year, I'd rather have a couple really nice prospects than have Quintana just do what he's doing right now.
Yeah, and again, we can always look back in hindsight of, oh well, the Mets should have sold or whatever. But at the point that they were at, I mean, they were in the wild card race. I mean, that's where they were at the trade deadline, and I understand a lot of the moves that they made, because I did like the moves that they did make, and I still do. But I feel like they just have a lot of pieces in place, and sometimes when it's not flowing, it's not flowing. This is the main reason as to why I didn't get too excited in June. It's just the main reason as to why, because I know and I can see this team at its worst. I've seen the team at its worst, and I've seen the team at its best. And what I've seen this year is that it's either they are the best team in baseball or they are a bottom 5 team. That's how you ride the waves with this team. That's how they have been this year. It's not just any inconsistency. They are just the most streakiest bunch known to man. Very, very streaky. One day you love them, the next day you want to kill them. And that is not really a way as to where a baseball team should be playing baseball. It's not an efficient way to be playing baseball, where a lot of things have to go right and a lot of little puzzle pieces have to fit in order for them to actually play consistent baseball. And it doesn't matter what team they are playing, they will be a huge opponent to them. And I'm not saying that every team, they should automatically beat them because of what it says on paper. But I think that one thing that this team lacks, and somebody said it in the chat, stop making excuses and start playing fundamental baseball. And how I look at that is common sense. Some kind of common sense. These teams are not that good. They're all under 500. You should be willing and you should be able to play them well, to win 2 out of 3 from them, to maybe sweep one of them. And the fact that we are having these conversations in the middle of August is scary. Especially when you're talking about a team, for the positives out there, who are seeing what they're seeing and they're like, well, let's wait till the end. This team's only 2 games out of that final wild card spot. And that's how bad it has been in August so far. Nobody feels confident right now. And I'm sure we'll be having a different discussion. I'm sure they'll be the hottest team in baseball in 3 weeks. And we'll just throw that discussion out the bin. At this point, you have such a horrendous August. Hopefully they play well in September. Roll the dice. Why don't you? I think there's a lot of pieces here that can contribute in the margins. I think there's a lot of pieces here that can be maximized. But for some reason, they can't maximize it at the right time. And also talking about maximizing the actual talent that these players have. I do want to go into one last thing in this series. I remember a lot of people getting upset yesterday because the Mets pinch hit Alvarez for Jeff McNeil or something because he wanted like a lefty matchup. Here's how I see it, okay? And I don't know if this is really anything. You know, we all know where this is coming from, but I agree. I agreed with the move. And I may be one of the few that did. Because when you talk about logic, yes, Jeff McNeil has been good in the second half. Yes, Francisco Alvarez has been so horrendous. He's a bust. He's the worst player of all time. We know that. I personally think it was a good move. Here's why. Let's talk about the logic here. Whether you're looking at plain old numbers or not, the two pitchers that Jeff McNeil would have faced would have been Scott Alexander, who in his career, hitters have a sub, not over, sub 400 OPS against him. Left-handed hitters against him. That's all he does. That's the reason why he's bounced around, because he has not been able to get right-handed hitters out. He carves up left-handed hitters, and he's having a really good season. The only left-handed hitter I would have put up against him had the stomach flu and is also having the worst slump of his career. And also, let's think about the other one. Mason Miller. If you think Jeff McNeil is going to get a hit off of Mason Miller, I've got some really bad news for you. Just because he has a good batting average in the second half, there is absolutely no way that Jeff McNeil, with his bottom 5% bat speed, is going to catch up to Mason Miller. Not a shot in hell. The only guy that has a better chance at that is Francisco Alvarez. Francisco Alvarez made some solid contact off of Mason Miller. I'm not saying that Alvarez is not hit better than McNeil, but one thing I will say, and I watched every McNeil at bat because we all know how big of a McNeil fan I am. At the game, they show the exit velocity for every single piece of contact that they make, not just putting the ball in play on the scoreboard. Not a single one of the pieces of contact, not a single one of those pieces of contact were above 90 miles an hour. Even the double that he had, all these foul balls of where he's working the count and getting in the pitcher's head, none of them. So how the hell would he do well against Mason Miller? I get it. He's a hot bat in the lineup. I get it. But like, would he even foul anything off against Mason Miller? Let's be honest here. We already know that Alvarez has the quicker bat in the situation. So I think it was a good move. I was okay with it. I know people are frustrated, but also let's talk about Jeff McNeil, who has like a sub 450 OPS in late and close games. Like, come on. Like, I understand Jeff McNeil is happy Jeff right now, but let's keep him at happy Jeff. How about that? Do I think that there was a better move there? Probably. But like, come on. Like, McNeil was going to do something even worse. He was going to do something even worse against a guy like Mason Miller. And not to mention Scott Alexander, who all he does is mow down left-handed hitters. So, listen, it's not just me defending Mendoza. I think it's just the point of common sense. If you believe, again, with the hot hitter of he did it once, he'll do it again, of Jeff McNeil, if you believe he's going to get a hit off Mason Miller or Scott Alexander, like I said, who dominates left-handed hitting, I have a bridge to sell to you. Like, I don't know how, in what possible, use my eyes. I did use my eyes. He could not get anything over 90 miles an hour. He couldn't hit anything over 90 miles an hour. How is he going to catch up to Mason Miller? How? What, because he turned on a slider from Paul Skeens? Like, I don't understand the logic, because I've always been the one where it's like the tools create stats. Alvarez had a better chance against Mason Miller than Jeff McNeil. It's true. How is it not true? Can't hit anything. He hit a fly ball to center field. Would Jeff McNeil do that? Would Jeff McNeil even put the ball in play? Yes. Yeah. McNeil has never hit guys who close to 100. Well, guess what? It's not even close to 100. It's 103 miles an hour. Jesus Christ. I mean, it's just these little things that are being dissected where there's perfect common sense here. He wasn't going to catch up to any of it at all. Now, speaking of catching up, let's move on. Unless you want to add anything.
I just had like a couple of Mason Miller things. So I'm just looking at some numbers from him. The last time that he threw more than 3 outs in an outing was June 14th. So it's been 2 months since Oakland has put him in that scenario, which to me kind of makes sense, because if he's mostly a one-inning reliever and he's like your main guy, why would you put him in that situation? And then for Miller, this was his season high in pitch count, so the A's really wanted this game. So I thought that was interesting. And I think with Miller, no matter who you put against him, like it's a bad matchup for anybody. So I think it was more so the Alexander matchup why he pulled McNeil, because that's when he did it. He didn't do it when Miller was pitching, did it when Alexander was pitching. So I think that was kind of the main reason as to why. And also it's like Did he know Mason Miller was going to go for a 6-out save and then, walk a batter and hit a batter? And even like one last thing with Miller, and we talked about with pitching, and like they all have the same issue, hitting. Like I've talked every episode about they struggle with the sliders. How many sliders out of the batter's box was Mason Miller throwing that guys were just flailing at and fishing at?
I need to know the stat of 2-strike hit by pitches by the Mets.
That's another thing that they do way too much. I like cardinal sins of pitching that they do way too much. So I feel like they just do a lot of things just wrong, So it was just weird for a lot of instances that Oakland really, really won that game, really wanted to win that series. To put Mason Miller in that kind of situation where it's like, if I'm Oakland, my main goal would be to keep Mason Miller healthy. It's because when you're 19 games under 500, you're not getting back in it. So I didn't quite understand that.
I can tell you right now, they don't care. The A's do
I know they
care.
don't. Oh, I know they don't. But if you just want to like get a bunch of players to be good to then trade them to then get young players, then having Mason Miller healthy is part of that. So again, I never really know what they don't really have a plan. So they're just a weird team, and to lose a series to them is just always very embarrassing.
He's saying that I'm such a McNeil hater that it makes me sound ridiculous for Alvarez. Again, like I said, I didn't think Alvarez was the number one choice in that scenario. And yes, he has not done anything lately, but again, he would be able to catch up to Mason Miller. That's the sort of thinking. If you believe that McNeil is the better option against Mason Miller, again, or Scott Alexander, who dominates left-handed hitters, that's all he does, then like these are simple. This is not like any expected numbers. This is not any advanced analytics. This is just concept of just like you really, when you have guys up there with the best bat speed or the best power, those are the guys you want up against Mason Miller, because you're not going to beat him by going hit after hit. You're not going to get that many opportunities against him. We talk about this in the postseason all the time. So, when has Alvarez hit a good fastball lately? When is McNeil? McNeil's not hitting fastballs well either. The way that this concept turns of the results that he has gotten or whatever. He's not hitting Mason Miller. If Jeff McNeil ever gets a hit against somebody like Mason Miller, if Jeff McNeil ever gets something, a hit off of anything past 100 miles an hour, we can revert back to this conversation. But I can almost guarantee you it will never happen. It never will. And for those of you who are asking me, he hit a ball to center field. He hit it 101 miles an hour to center field. You have a better chance with somebody who can catch up to that as compared to somebody like Jeff McNeil, who, again, can't even crack 90 half of the time. It's true. It literally is true. Guys who can't catch up to hard throwers. Like, you kidding me? Again, you're telling me, and this is the last time I'm going to do this because I want to move on with my show. So let's just, McNeil has been one of our best hitters outside of Lindor in the second half. Yes, he has. But you're telling me that he has a better chance against 103 miles an hour from Mason Miller because of his batting average in the past games? That's the reason why? McNeil would not even make contact with Mason Miller. I could guarantee you that. Never. It will never happen. Speaking of something never happening, also known as this show moving on, Starling Marte is currently rehabbing in AAA Syracuse. He has looked fairly good. Looks like he's starting to get healthy. Maybe next week after that, we see him rejoin the lineup. Now, since Marte got injured all the way up to now, the Mets got to make a lot of outfield decisions. Tyrod Taylor is still here. We know Brandon Nimmo is here. He's been struggling. Harrison Bader is still here. DJ Stewart is out, but they also made the acquisition for Jesse Winker. We know Jeff McNeil can play the outfield. So there are a lot of outfield options now. So putting Marte back into the mix, because we already know that he is going to make the lineup deeper offensively. Let's just say that. And we all know how Starling Marte can be, but overall he has been impressive offensively, and it seems like he still has been quick enough against pitches. Again, this is minor league stuff again, but definitely can add on to the lineup and make it a little bit more deeper than it is. How would you, I'll ask you this straight up, Frank, how would you kind of configure the outfield right now, where I think we have a lot of cooks in the kitchen right now, because we have a lot of guys who could make starts for you multiple times in a week with Nimmo and Taylor and Bader and Winker. So we'll see what happens, but I mean, how would you kind of configure this with the outfield? Because it's going to get crowded here when Starling Marte gets back.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I always go back to with Marte is the person that affects Starling Marte the most is JD Martinez. I think that for us, the concern with Marte is always the health, and the easiest way to keep him healthy is to DH him. But the Mets cannot do that because of JD Martinez. So I feel like he's also a very big factor in this configuration, and it's to the point where most of the time when you are playing Marte, he does have to play in the outfield. Now, I would like to try Marte in left and Nimmo in right, but the Mets have not put Nimmo in right field at any point this season, and I don't think they're going to. They've shown you, listen, we'll put DJ Stewart in right field, we'll put Jesse Winker in right field. They are just doing everything in their power to avoid Nimmo playing right field. I understand the arm concerns. Fine. Okay, so I'm just going to act like that's not a factor, because it isn't. They just won't do it. So I think that...
I think it is, and he should be kept in center field. They just should put him in center field. And I don't think
but the thing is that they haven't, if you do that, they haven't put Bader in right field. So I feel like no matter what, so I'm just trying to be realistic and think of okay, what are they going to do as Carlos Mendoza? Because I don't get my way. That's not an option here. So I'm looking at okay, well, realistically, when looking at what the Mets have done, what can you do? I think when Marte does play, he's going to get some starts in right field, but I think to keep him healthy, you can't really play him that many times back-to-back days if you want to keep him on the field. So I feel like with Marte, you maybe have a couple of days where he plays right field, and then maybe you give JD Martinez a day off and give Marte a DH spot, and then that's where you kind of can decide based on the matchups. It's okay, we're facing a righty. On the day where Marte's DHing or off day, Jesse Winker plays. Okay, now we're facing a guy who, let's say Jose Iglesias is a good matchup. I could put Iglesias at second, and I could put McNeil in the outfield. Or I could put Taylor out there late in games. I feel like that's going to be a big thing, as we've seen when Jesse Winker does make starts. So I think it's just something that, Marte coming back, it's going to help a little bit for sure, because he is the best option offensively out of that group between Taylor, Winker, and Marte. He's the best option. So you are going to play him, but I think with his health concerns and history that you do kind of want to take it easy with him and not try to re-aggravate things. So I feel like he's going to get some playing time. He'll help a little bit. My main concern with him as a player is that he's also a right-handed hitter who does chase at sliders on the outside corner. So I feel like he's just another one of these guys that are pretty similar to what a lot of these Met hitters are already struggling with. So he's going to help solve some things, but not everything.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think, the Mets have kind of forced off of energy with their with their offense, which it does kind of bug me, because with how streaky it has been, how streaky that will always be, where you're stringing these hits together and you can't, because we talk about this all the time. Frank, you talk about this in your post games all the time, not being able to string these hits together, not getting the timely hitting or whatever. Even though the Mets have had a huge uptick in power, especially with Alonso kind of having a down power year, they still have kind of lacked that situational baseball a lot. And one thing that I know that Starling Marte does well is situational baseball. We know the one thing that Starling Marte can do is, with runners in scoring position, he's able to take the right approach, whether it is just putting the ball in play, whether it is drawing a walk. He definitely knows how to lock in those certain scenarios, and he kind of just adds to the bottom half of the order now, where we've talked about it before, where the bottom of the order seems to be better at situational hitting. We've seen Starling Marte just be one of the best high leverage pieces on this team for a long time. We don't know where his head's at for the first 7 innings, but with him hitting, I think that he anchors the bottom of the lineup a lot better. For him defensively, I pretty much have written him off as a right fielder. I don't want to see him play right field ever again, but he's going to play right field when he comes back, because we have not seen him play left field or center field, which he's not going to play either. We haven't seen him play anything but right field or DH in these rehab assignments. Obviously, a move to left field is not going to happen during the season. It's just not going to. I hope that that's the fair consideration next year, but that's a different discussion for a later time. Because I personally think that if he's not going to play left field, you just trade him. You just trade him. You get rid of him for the last year of that contract. But again, that's a different story. Nothing about the transactions right now of what could happen. I think that with Starling Marte, the way that we get value out of him, like we've said, is all 5 tools from him. And a lot of them will continue to be diminished as he continues to get older, continues to get banged up as he has been. And I feel like the only way that you can contribute it to keep him healthy, maybe even uses his like lower half a little bit more, is put him in the least amount of range possible in the outfield, that being left field. And I think that a lot of Mets fans have agreed with me as to where he's diminished his part in range. He still has the arm to play the outfield, but at some point, he's got to move to left field. He just has to. And I think that even though you have, Nimmo, they wanted to put in left field quite a few times this year because kind of his arm suggests that. Bader, you can put him in the range position. Same goes for Taylor. Jesse Winker's more of a left fielder. He's not a right fielder by any means.
He's really a DH, honestly. But
he really pretty much is a DH, but you have JD Martinez. The same thing goes for the DH situation as to where you give JD Martinez a day off. Since the flexibility you have on this bench, because it is flexible, you give JD Martinez the day off because he's older. You put Vientos in the DH position. That's something I prefer a little bit more.
Which we haven't really seen.
We haven't seen. Which I'm glad they are, utilizing his arm at third base.
And to some extent, I big thing for me is always player development. I'd let Vientos just kind of stick it out at third base this year. Let him learn it.
Yeah, sure.
I feel like, the only way you're going to get better is
but only
reps.
The occasional 6 out of 7, when JD needs a day off.
Yeah.
JD gets hit on the elbow at 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Mm-hmm. You put in Mark Vientos. I don't have Marte in that DH equation. I only see him providing the value, somewhat close to providing the value with that contract he has in left field. And I think that's the main reason as to why you're why we've been kind of conflicted, because I don't want to use Marte, because I think Marte still has a little bit left in the tank per hitting tools, or maybe he could steal a little bit more bases than he has been. But I don't think we've come to the point where just offensively starting every day, where he should just be a platoon bat with Jesse Winker in left field. There's no reason as to why that should be happening. The same thing goes for, it more goes to more right field, where you kind of platoon that of Taylor and Bader. And a lot of people I see some people in the comments asking who would be DFA'd from Marte. Most likely will be Ben Gamel.
Yeah.
And how that adds into the equation with, guys like all these infielders we have who can play a lot of infield positions. And that's another thing you can add into the equation because we've also seen Jose Iglesias play a lot of third base this year. So when you put Vientos in there for the DH, you can put Jose Iglesias in at third base, or you can put, or you can just, what was I going to say? Oh, no, that's pretty much it. Jose Iglesias at third base, and then second base, whatever they do with that, with McNeil, or they bring somebody else up or something like an infielder for that when the roster expands. I feel like there's tons of infield flexibility here. There's tons of outfield flexibility here, as to where it's a good thing that you have like 5 outfielders here to kind of, I don't know, maybe fill in some of the workload that Marte probably can't handle. And they all can be not everyday players, but they all can start. They're all starting caliber players, minus somebody like Ben Gamel, who, like, Ben Gamel, I think he's done his job. Like, he's not great at all, but he hasn't been a complete zero. He hasn't been a complete dead weight on this team.
96 OPS plus, Taylor's at 95.
That's a bench player right there.
Yeah, that's
bench player.
Like, 4th outfielder,
Perfect.
5th outfielder production. Like, he's doing what his job is. Like, he gets on base
a lot more
every now
useful
and
than
then,
Jankowski was here for or like these other guys who come in.
Defensive replacement, speed replacement, who turned out to be much better for Texas and a big piece of their, well, not big piece, but a piece of their World Series team. So it's just different roles for different guys. But I feel like one of the questions we're seeing a lot is about Marte being a full-time DH next season. There's still a lot of things that need to happen before that happens. Yeah. I feel like the Pete Alonso thing is a big one, because I feel like Pete kind of determines maybe where Mark Vientos ends up. And it's like, if Pete is here, Vientos probably stays at third. If Pete's not here, there's a chance you can move Vientos to first base, and if you add a third baseman and you have Pete, maybe you can move Vientos to DH. And really, I just don't quite feel that Marte's bat is really worthy of a full-time DH. Like we said, it's like he was brought in to be a outfielder with speed. Like I said, he's brought to be a 5-tool player. And if we're down to like 1 to 2 tools of like maybe speed and maybe contact, like that's not really what you paid for at all. Like, and we knew that was going to happen at the end of the contract, but the value is just really not there. So I feel like there still is like a lot of things that are going to happen, because the other thing that's going to happen is that, okay, Bader is now a free agent. Will they keep him? We'll see. I just feel like you might see a kind of different team next year, and then that will determine what they end up doing with Marte, because he's one of the few guys that actually are under contract. So I feel like there's still like a lot of other things we're not going to know yet. I feel like there's still a lot that needs to happen when it's like, then when we see a team like, okay, now it makes sense Marte is going to DH. But I feel like there's still a lot of guys who it's like, what happens with them determines what happens with other players on the team.
The only thing I'm hoping for in the short term right now with Starling Marte is that he comes back here and he can help spark this lineup up a little bit, because we have seen him be one of the, not difference makers, but be one of the guys who kind of just sets everyone up. He sparks everyone up. And when we see Marte hit, a lot of the other guys kind of follow through with him. We saw that a lot, especially with the identity of that 2022 team. Marte was a big part of that team. He really was. And whether you want to talk about somebody like,
he was the number 2 hitter, and like we always talk about, number 2 hitter is like one of your most important. And we saw when he got hit by that pitch in Pittsburgh in September, team's offense was totally different. Like, he was quite honestly like the spark plug, the guy that got everything going at the top, getting on base, stealing bases, making things happen, setting things up for when P. Alonso used to be good with runners on base. So like that's what he used to do. And I'm kind of curious now that we're seeing tonight, Mark Vientos batting second again, Nimmo's moved to third, Alonso's fifth. I do wonder where Marte is now going to bat once he is ready. Like, maybe he does go back to 2, like maybe he goes to 3. Like, I feel like there's, but just with Nimmo struggles, there's like a lot of different, and again, it's something of a good thing where the Mets do have enough bats where you can do a lot of different configurations. But I'm kind of curious to see where he ends up as, again, being another right-handed hitter.
Here's the thing with Nimmo. I still would ride it out with him in the 2-hole. I still would do it, and I know that he's really struggling. He's not been good. But I still do see the quality ABs from Nimmo. We're just not getting the catalyst results that we usually get from him, which has been very odd. It's been very odd with Nimmo because he's had a few because we have not seen these types of Nimmo stretches before. So it's been a little unsettling, especially it's on full blast for him with the 2-hole. Not for this long either. We've seen him, have like some offer. I mean, I talked about this last episode alone. I'd still ride with him in the 2-hole, but if we are starting to getting to a point where it continues to get worse, there probably will have to be a rapid change that is made.
I mean, I think if Vientos is swinging a hot bat, I don't mind him hitting second. Like, I'm okay with it. I mean, he was a big piece yesterday with those 2 home runs. Like, it worked out really nicely. So I'm not opposed to it, but I don't think Nimmo third is the solution. I think if you're moving him from 2, you have to move him out of the top in general. I feel like it's 1 or 2. To me, 3 is not really an option. Maybe until he heats up, you can move him 6, 7. You could do, again, with this line, we could do a lot of different things, but I don't think 3 is really the solution because it's still, there is that change of approach where a lot of times when you're 3, you're no longer in table setter mode. So I don't think that if Nimmo is struggling, putting him in a spot where he has to change his approach and his identity of what he is as a player is necessarily going to make him get out of it. I think that might be kind of messing up 2 things at once there.
Yeah, it's been talked about recently with what happened with him kind of transitioning to the 2 spot or the 3 spot. They kind of talked about it as to where they're kind of looking at him as a power hitter now. And he does have a lot of these tools to be a power hitter because he's developed them. He's like one of the few, he's one of the few guys who can he just knows how to maximize and knows how to just be a better player every single year. Like, he just continues to add something to his game that continues to just make him he's a fresh player every year. Like, you just don't know what you're going to get from him, but you know it's going to be good. And it's been a little bit off from that this year. I'm still letting Nimmo kind of ride it out a little bit because I know eventually he's going to get it going. Obviously, there's a little bit like deeper measures you probably have to take if he continues to struggle. But I'm letting him ride it out so far. But again, you have to put a short leash on it because batting second, it's pretty important to a team. Again, that's one of the most plate appearances anybody on the team gets, aside from the leadoff hitter, which Lindor, he's got that locked down now. He is not leaving the leadoff position until his contract ends here. What is it, 2032 or whatever? He ain't moving from that leadoff spot ever. And
I got your Nimmo number right here, honestly.
Okay.
I'm looking at it. So he had that stretch against Pittsburgh and Washington where he had a home run in 3 consecutive games. That was from July 8th to July 10th. He has not hit a home run since then. So right when you thought that he found the power stroke, he got it going 3 in a row, hasn't happened since. He built on it. It's so strange. Like, you've like, oh, now he's a power hitter. He's got it, and he hasn't hit a home run since.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like flabbergasting moments where like, okay, this is what Nimmo's doing right now. Like, usually he's in the thick of everything, right? And listen, before anybody puts in the discussion of, and I'm trying not to revert back to it with Jeff McNeil, if he is no 5, no 6, I don't care how hot the guy is. He belongs in the lower half of the lineup. The Mets just can't leave it alone, can they? Every time McNeil has a great game, they did it. What are they doing tonight?
Well, McNeil is 7, and your buddy Alvarez
7
6,
tonight.
So there you go.
Oh, well, exactly.
Oh no, sorry, I lied. No, McNeil's 8, Alvarez 7. I'm sorry, my bad.
Oh, McNeil's 8.
McNeil 8,
he belongs in the lower third of the order. Okay, the lower third, the lower half. You want to bet him 6th or whatever? Fine. The Mets just can never leave it alone with him, can they? Every single time when he gets hot, we're like, oh, move him to 5. Get him in the cleanup position. They can never leave it alone. McNeil is at the point where he is a marginal hitter. He's a marginal hitter. He is not any superstar. He is not a batting champion anymore. He is a marginal hitter. 6, 7, 8, or 9. That's the only where he belongs, because I know plenty of situations as to where somebody gets on, they pitch around somebody, the Jeff McNeil gets up and screws it up. Keep him at that position. Leave it alone. Leave it alone. If you want to put Marte at 2 because he can be a catalyst once in a while, sure. I don't like Marte at 2. I don't like him at 5. Again, another guy that I like anchoring the bottom of the lineup. And this is, again, if it's not broke, don't fix it, okay? Just because Jeff McNeil's batting average is high since the All-Star break does not mean he deserves more ABs. Just leave it like it is. And I know I always sound like a McNeil hater when I say this, which I am. But I always sound like I'm just going after Jeff. But we all know what Jeff McNeil is capable of, okay? Listen, if you like Happy Jeff, continue with Happy Jeff, okay? Don't give him a workload that we know he's not capable of. Because then we're going to get him having the temper tantrums, and we're going to go in this cycle once again. Leave it alone. Just leave it alone. Now, speaking of leaving things alone, David Stearns is alone in the front office right now. And we have heard reports throughout the offseason, and they kind of died down. And, of course, Andy Martino, who just loves to bring up conversations no matter what. The Mets are still undecided in whether they're going to fill the GM role this offseason, the offseason after that. Kind of like moving in of like the staff of the ideal guys that they would put behind David Stearns, like be David Stearns' right-hand man. Okay, right now he does have one who is also mentioned in some of these excerpts from the Andy Martino article. He's also been considered for that job, who I personally think is probably going to be the guy that gets it if they do it. But let's get into the search being on here of what Andy Martino has said. These are some of the excerpts from his article, and I'm going to read a few of them off here. Now, obviously, Stearns has not settled yet on a decision regarding the future of the GM position. And also, I want to note that this is not the only structural element of the organization that Stearns is still mulling. There are still three other areas awaiting decisions that are pro scouting, analytics, international scouting, stuff like that. Now, from Andy Martino, he also said that internal speculation for the GM job has been centered around Vice President and Special Assistant to the President of Baseball Operations, Eduardo Brisulia, who came to the Mets from Milwaukee shortly after working with Stearns, and he could emerge as the leading candidate. That's who I was referring to. I just did not know the name off the top of my head. Also, industry insiders have connected to rival executives, Matt Klentak of the Brewers and Mike Groupman of the Boston Red Sox. Both of them actually worked with Stearns in Milwaukee and are said to enjoy strong personal relationships with him. So those are guys who also have been connected as well. Then there was another blurb that kind of, I don't know if it was like just shocked a little Mets fans a little bit, depending on what we feel about him with us, with the entire segment we had on him. This came as a little bit of a shock, but for some reason they have such a huge love relationship with this guy. Folks around the league have also mentioned Mets pitching coach Jeremy Hefner as a potential GM in the mold of the Dodgers GM Brandon Gomes and Red Sox chief baseball officer Craig Breslow. Now, Hefner has come up in internal conversations in other front office jobs as a target for high-ranking executive jobs, and that is according to league sources. So leave that as you will. Could it be Andy Martino just stirring the pot? Maybe, because that's what he does. He's Andy Martino. But with Jeremy Hefner kind of being floated around. We all know that the Mets will continue to make assessments on filling a position. They will make internal consideration. It always will. They always will. They've interviewed bench coaches, they've interviewed first base coaches before in their own organization for a managerial job before. It's happened. Do I think that this is kind of a smokescreen with somebody like Jeremy Hefner coming in here? I don't know. I really don't know. It depends on what they really like in him. Because, again, like I've talked about Jeremy Hefner before as to where I think that a lot of his philosophies work in theory, but he just hasn't been able to execute that. It's going to be put on full blast if he becomes the general manager and is unable to execute some things, because he's going to have an even bigger spotlight on him, and way bigger than he has as a pitching coach, because we never see any blame or any accountability towards the guy. And not to mention with Jeremy Hefner, I know that it's the manager's job to address the media after these games. But I said it in our group chat yesterday. I'd like to see Hefner take the freaking mic once, because of kind of all the problems we have had here. Different story. Not to mention, if you're thinking about him being as a possible GM or something, get him some time on the mic there. Let's see what his thought process is. Because I'd like to hear it, because I don't know what the thought process is. I'm kind of lost with him. But when we talk about just the GMs in general, Frank, what do you think about these as main takeaways? Because there are names that get brought up all the time. I think that there are some guys out there that they should also consider as well. Do you think that this Hefner thing is a smokescreen? Do you think that they're really they consider it? Do you think maybe he gets a job somewhere else? Fingers crossed. But I mean, what do you think about this? Because it's a little early here. It's most likely going to be addressed in the offseason if they do. But what are your thoughts on adding in the GM department and also other types of roles as well that need filling?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely all for David Stearns adding a guy from Milwaukee or someone he's worked with in Milwaukee before. I think it is very important that, like, when you talk about like president, baseball operations, and general manager, they really do need to be on the same page. It's extremely important just for like organizational stability, and just kind of having that going forward is something that they need, because we talked about how many different guys have been in charge since Steve Cohen took over ownership of the Mets. So I wouldn't mind seeing something like that. But there's a couple of things for me. So the first thing is that also what happened this week is the Mets let go of a bunch of guys who were part of like international scouting and just overall with scouting. So it feels like there just is some things going on up top in the Mets organization. If they are like getting rid of some guys that you would imagine they'd bring in new people to take over. So there definitely is some moving around happening up front. But one of the things that I would kind of look at, well, two things. Number one, it's Andy Martino. But number two, we talked about like all the players that the Mets acquired were guys that were never rumored to them. And guys who they were rumored to, they never acquired. So I'm not just going to assume that the names that they show are the names the Mets are going to get. So I could see the GM being someone who was not listed in those excerpts. I mean, that's definitely a possibility. I just feel like the Mets, at least in the Stearns regime, have done a better job of no leaks, is kind of what you call it, as far as like not knowing ahead of time what they're going to do before it actually happens. And when it comes to Hefner being in a front office, one of the examples I would kind of use is Chris Young being a pitcher who then ended up in a front office as well. I feel like in a different, like, pitching coach and things like that. But I don't want it to happen for the Mets. I feel like we've kind of made it clear. And I do think, to your point too, like that is a pretty, I don't know if he would really want that, honestly, because if he's someone who isn't very vocal, he just doesn't seem vocal on the just watching the games. But when you are a GM, you should be more vocal. Like, you should be addressing, having press conferences, addressing things with fans. So that would be quite a change for him to go from being a pitching coach who's just kind of in the background, not saying much, to then all of a sudden be the GM. And it would just kind of also be weird that like he would go from working under Carlos Mendoza to being Mendoza's boss. So I feel like that could also create kind of a weird, awkward dynamic in the workplace. So I don't know if I necessarily think that's a good idea either. I'm more okay with him just kind of going somewhere else, and if he has success, good for him. And then maybe it's like, oh, okay, I guess he was not the worst pitching coach ever. But I feel like let's kind of see that happen. And then again, like you said earlier, having then Stearns bring in his own pitching coach, whether it's someone from Milwaukee or just someone else that he has ties with,
Yeah.
that he trusts, that could actually kind of put forward his philosophies and like the players that Stearns is going for and the guys he targets. This new pitching coach could then get what Stearns sees in them and get those results to happen on the field. So, I'm okay with him bringing Milwaukee guy. I'm totally for it. I'd like to say, I think it's important that they have that commodity, but I just think that I don't know if I necessarily believe everything that's out there. I'm not going to put a lot of stock in it.
Yeah, of course. And listen, I think there hasn't been really a decision made at all with if they're even going to hire a general manager yet. And I think that that's something that has to also be sprinkled in there because, again, we have seen like Stearns kind of just push it off as to where he said, well, I'm kind of like handling the president of baseball operations. Because let's not forget, we had a like distinct plan at the beginning where we thought Billy Epler was going to be our general manager. And then he kind of dropped out of the position, and then the Mets kind of just like faded away from it, and it seemed like David Stearns was just taking the full-on reins. I do think that the internal piece, they're going to just move like here. What is it? It's Edward Brisula. I think that he's probably going to be the main guy that is like considered there. Because like I think that there is like a working relationship between the two of them, but I really do want to hear kind of more of a GM voice too, as to where, Stearns it's not just like him just like facing all the heat or whatever, but as to where you have like two minds kind of making this thing up. Because I feel like Stearns has had a lot more say in things. I do want to see a little bit more of a 50-50 when you get somebody like somebody behind Stearns, even though Stearns has had his success before. They do still need a mind like that. And one other piece of information, like you said, they did fire those amateur scouts and international scouting this week. They fired a lot of guys. They let go of like 6 different people, and it's on the bottom right of our graphic here of some of the guys they let go of. Not no names or whatever, but they have been guys who have been behind a lot of it. Those are also positions. Yeah.
That's a lot of people to just be like, okay, you know what, all you guys, goodbye. Like that's I don't know, that seems kind of drastic. Just all of a sudden, like,
and there is a reason for that, and there is a reason for that, and it doesn't really have much as to do with they screwed up Beatty, they screwed up this guy. Doesn't have anything to do with that. They had a lot of issues this year with a lot of amateur pieces that are like in their first year or signing guys. There was a guy who lied about his age. There was a guy who got suspended for performance-enhancing drugs. They also had another guy. They also had just a bunch of these guys get injured as well. It had nothing to do with like any of the top guys like Gilbert or Jet Williams or some guys that, got hurt this year. It seemed like, from the very beginning, from the very bottom, there was a lot of issues as to where they had to cut the cord there. Like they had to cut the cord with these guys. And it didn't have anything to do with, these guys are on Stearns guys. There was a lot of odd stuff, and it may not be something that's put on much blast when a lot of, Mets fans, they kind of just talk about it from like the higher upper levels and like the prospects, the top prospects and the major league team. There was a lot of guys like I follow and I like talk to a lot with, the prospects and the player development, like way past, the top of the top, like the Gilberts and the lower development from like the very beginning. There's been a lot of issues that are just not acceptable, and it just cannot happen with the amateur scouting guys who they've just brought in a lot of pieces. I'm not saying they're just like complete bad eggs, but I'm just saying that there has been some real concerning things that have happened with how they've kind of dealt out the international pool money. And it also can come from some guys who have also been there as well, because there are some manager scouting guys that were here even way before David Stearns came in here. We've also seen some international scouting just not really do well and not really pan out. One example, a big international signing they had, Alex Ramirez, who has really, really struggled recently. And, Stearns definitely took a chance on Alex Ramirez as well. He put a strong belief in him, putting him on the 40-man roster, protecting him from the Rule 5 draft. So him not really performing, you got to go all the way back to the very beginning. And there are some spots that he's going to need to fill. And I'm glad that they are doing that. Because even if he brought in somebody or whatever, a lot of these guys were not hired by Stearns. And you have to be able for Stearns to do his job and hire guys that he likes. And I'm glad they are doing that. And somebody did say in the chat that where they have to kind of like evaluate it internally. That's probably another reason as to why Jeremy Hefner is still here, or Eric Chavez, or something like that. But as an organization, like just as a whole, evaluating the organization, that's something that we know has been a main thing for David Stearns this year, transition year, whatever you want to call it. Hopefully that job is finished by 2025, maybe 2026, where they bring in the baseball minds that they want to, and they're not in this in and out. We'll see what happens. We're keeping all of our options open. And right now, that's how I feel they are looking at it. Again, it's a little bit early. This is more off-season talk. Another guy I hope that they try and pry away, which I don't think it's going to happen. We've talked about him before. Josh Burns of the Dodgers. I wish they put him in that mix, but I'm pretty sure it will be a step down because he's he's like a senior vice president of baseball operations with the Dodgers right now. So him just being the general manager, he probably would need like the 50-50 split there, or they give him the same job or whatever and then give it to the guy who has it now. It's not just like the more baseball minds, the better. I just want the best of the best at the top. And we don't really know what Jeremy Hefner would do as an executive, whether they think he would be able to do that. Because I think that the thought process of Jeremy Hefner being a front office piece, it's there. Like, I understand the thought process. Because, again, like I've said, his philosophies work in theory. He just hasn't been able to execute it. And, again, it's going to be put on full blast if he's in a full front office thing. So, I mean, I don't know what else you want to add there. We can just move on. But, we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. But
yeah, it just thinks that
there hasn't been any decisions that have been made yet. So,
yeah, it just thinks that this feels like it's a talking point for us like every off season. I mean, like how many different years have we had the conversation of who's going to be the Mets GM? Like we've done this like literally almost every single year since we started the show. So it's just another year. And again, I hope that now like with Stearns, that's why I like picking someone that they get along and everything. This way they could stay and you don't have to keep doing the GM searches. I also think that it's a bad look for like other players or other front office people who like look at the Mets and they're like, oh, they keep losing their GMs. And like, what's going on there? Like, do I want to be a part of that? I don't know. So I feel like it's just a good thing just to show some stability. And then, deciding who you have throughout the first pitch. Like sometimes like it could be Grimace or other times it could be people who are famous for very bizarre reasons. But I just think that I don't know. Sometimes I just wonder like what their goal is as far as like what they want their press to be. Like I just feel like a lot of times with the Mets, they just kind of are like the any press is good press kind of thing. Like between I don't know. I just feel like
what makes you say that?
Yeah, just the way they even still like with different ownership, the way they handle some things. I'm like, I don't know. It's just very
playing with fire here. We're playing with fire here. Let's just say. Even from the very, very top of Steve Cohen, there's been things that he has said on Twitter where we're like, okay, let's relax. Let's not do this. Exactly. Which, I think that there's a lot. And, Chaim Bloom will always be in that conversation as well, too. That's something you can consider. But, there's some cautious concerns from that. Let's not forget the Mookie Betts trade that has been an absolute disaster for Red Sox, which is the main blemish on his
Yeah.
record. And kind of that whole retooling that he did, it just completely fell apart into just mediocrity, and that's where the Mets have been for a long time, is mediocrity. So we'll see. I don't know if they go off track record. I don't know if they know, this guy has the upside to do this, but hopefully they do make the right decision. I trust that Stearns will make the right decision, and I don't think that Stearns has lied one bit. I've talked about this again. He's talked about there being growing pains this season. Oh, there's been a plenty. There's been a lot of plenty growing pains, whether you're talking about the young players or whether you're talking about the team's performance in general. There's been a lot of it. So we will see what they come up with, and I'm excited to see what minds he does bring in here because, again, we know that David Stearns is a very smart baseball mind, and hopefully there's a way that they can somewhat find this consistency and where they are in the playoff race every single year. Hopefully we get, some more consistency on the field as well and translate to that. Let's get into the injury report of guys who are not on the field right now. No, we have a few guys on the field right now. Bad segue. Anyways, JD Martinez exited Tuesday's game after leaving with a left elbow contusion after getting hit by the pitch by a 100-mile-an-hour fastball off of A's right-handed pitcher Joe Boyle on Tuesday's game. He did return to the lineup the next day, which was shocking, with an elbow guard on his left arm, so no further concern there. Sean Reed-Foley, we did get some interesting news from him yesterday. It looks like they are shutting him down from throwing for a few days after they ended his rehab assignment going past their capacity. There is no structural issues. They're just trying to strengthen his arm. Being a little bit cautious there because we all know about the injury concerns with Sean Reed-Foley year in and year out. He always seems to be on the injured list for extended periods of time every single year that he's been with the Mets and even before he was here. Danel Nunez threw a bullpen session on Tuesday. He is expected to throw another bullpen session with live BP on Friday. We still do not know if there is going to be a rehab assignment or a timetable for his return, but it seems like he is getting very close, and he is starting to throw off of the mound plenty of times during the week now. And again, that is a huge addition to this bullpen, who has been one of our best, if not our best, reliever all season long. So that will be another decision that the Mets will have to make roster-wise. We know one guy that we want to be gone, but we won't get into that. We've got a little bit of a time crunch here going into 2 hours. Christian Scott made 35 throws from 75 feet on Tuesday after making 25 throws on Sunday. No further update on him yet, but he looks like they are starting to progress a little bit. He has started the throwing program, and we all know he was placed on the 15-day IL due to a UCL sprain in his right elbow towards the end of July. So, seldom updates from him. Another update as well that we just got, that just dropped about an hour ago, from David Stearns himself, saying that the Mets hope that Kodai Senga can do upright throwing in the next 7 to 10 days. So I don't know what is going to be the situation with that. I know that they've talked about the small hope of him returning to the postseason. You're going to have to get to the postseason first in order for that to happen, for things to fall in place. But it's good to see him out on the field. And, it's weird as to where, with the Mets starting rotation, I think we all just to do a little bit, just a little bit touch on this. I think we all know that Kodai Senga going down kind of knocked the wind out of this rotation. I think we all knew, in terms of workload, in terms of the final stretch of this season, the Kodai Senga injury really knocked them out. And they're going to have to pick up from it because it doesn't look like he's going to be pitching for the rest of the season. So again, these are some factors that, again, where you're focusing on maybe Mania pitching as a 1 when he's not. Severino's got to get it going, and not to mention, guys like Quintana and guys like David Peterson. We'll see what happens with that pitching staff again, but it would be nice to get Kodai Senga back, but I don't know. It's going to be a little bit of quite a time crunch. Let's just say that. Now, speaking of individual performances, let's just get into everybody's favorite segment, studs and duds. One player that played fairly well, and we would like to give kudos to, give flowers to, one player that had a horrendous series, and there were quite a few of them because the Mets did not play well against Oakland, which they should have beat. Start off with studs. Frank, I'll swing it right back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go with Lindor. He's been riding the hitting streak. He hit got one of the runs in. So he's been playing good ball for what feels like, most of the season now. But it continued in this Oakland series. So I'll give it to him.
I mean, I got to go off with the other guy that you talked about as well, of guys just having great seasons. Mark Vientos, 2 home runs yesterday. I mean, he has been one of the few bright spots offensively consistently this year. And he really is just taking the job and ran with it. And I said this on Twitter. I think that we're talking about the wrong guy here. Let's just say for a second, we talk about Pete. We talk about Alvarez getting a long-term extension. We've talked about Severino coming back, maybe Bader coming back. When do the Mark Vientos extension talks start? What about that? Like what? I'm just saying, like, he's proven quite a bit in the time he's gotten. And let's just say that he's a major league hitter. We can all say that he's a major league hitter. Whether he slumps off or not, he's got the tools to do it. And, again, it also puts me in this situation where we're also talking about this. And again, this is a long conversation we can all have with Vientos, where he could play first base. Where does that leave Pete Alonso? We were saying if the season ended today, what would you do with Pete Alonso's situation? Frank, if you want to, what would you do at this current moment with Pete Alonso? Because I have a pretty straightforward answer.
Yeah, obviously you QO, but I would offer him pretty similar to what he got before, wherever that was, like that 7-160, whatever the number was. I'd offer that again. He takes it. He doesn't take it. I get the feeling that what's going to happen is this is going to drag on for a while. It's going to go very late into the offseason, near spring training. And then, unfortunately, I feel like he's going to end up taking a short-term deal somewhere. I hope the Mets don't give in and give him that, because I don't think that's going to be the solution. I feel like it's going to be on his mind again. He's going to press, and you're going to see the same thing happen.
Yeah, I have it straightforward, but probably a little bit just more blunt in this way. You get the qualifying offer. 7 years, $158 million was on the table. Good luck getting that somewhere else. That's it. I really have just kind of cut him out of this equation right now, because we're seeing a lot of concerning things from him, and maybe it does change throughout this September stretch where we really, really need him to perform. But if he wants 7 years, if he wants the $200 million that we're seeing, like the Freddie Freeman type of money, good luck getting that somewhere else, because you ain't getting it here. You ain't getting it here. I don't care what you've done for this franchise. I don't care how much you have impacted us, how many home runs you're going to hit as a Met. I don't care. I just don't anymore. I really have and it would be great to see him break the Mets franchise home run record. It'd be great to see him hit 500 home runs, all in a Mets uniform. It'd be great to see that. But again, like I've said multiple times, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, the Mets have not won anything to justify keeping any of these guys around anymore. And I know that hurts for some people that like Pete Alonso, and he became a huge fan favorite at the beginning. But we have to look at the situation in hand. They have not won anything, and it's not just Pete Alonso's fault. But this year, he's not doing himself any favors. Let's just say that. Anything else you want to add of or anything. And again, these are more off-season discussions, stuff like
Yeah,
that.
no, they've given him a lot
Um,
of chances to
yeah,
kind of like make, I don't know, like do what he's done before this season. You know what I mean? Like he's had those opportunities. He just hasn't come through in way too many of them. So, and that's just where they're at right now. So his age makes it really tough. You know, the fact that he's 30, like it really kind of limits you as far as what you can do. Like, you know, 7 is probably too much as well. So it's definitely a hard situation for them because like, you know, there's something like that homegrown, how much he's done as a Met and all that. So it's just it's an unfortunate spot.
yeah. I mean, here's the thing with Alonso, and we'll just get into the upcoming series. The thing that I have kind of said is he already sent a message to us as to what he wants long term. He turned down 7 years, 158 million, like I said, and he hired Scott Boras. So go to free agency, be the Scott Boras client that you are, and see if you can get something that you want. Because the asking price of what we know from Scott Boras in history, I'm not giving that to you. Like I'm not giving it to you. I'm sorry. And I it sucks that it has to happen this way because we know how much of an impact Pete Alonso has been on this team. We know. I mean, he is a fan favorite. A lot of people like him. And they liked him even before. They've wanted to pay him for a long time, but at the end of the day, they're going to have to make a decision. And I feel a little bit more comfortable. And, you know, a lot of people kind of just plug this in as to where, well, Vientos can play first base. Well, now I'm comfortable enough where, yeah, sure. Why not? Because Vientos has shown me that he could be a competent hitter at the major leagues. Like, yeah, I'd be willing to give that a shot if Pete Alonso ends up leaving. So, you know, that's where I'm at right now. Again, that's just kind of how I see it. Let's just get into the next series, which is related to the poll we have in the chat here. The series preview coming up against the Marlins. Sean Manaea will be on the mound against Rodney Munoz. Rodney Munoz has had 2 starts against the Mets in his career, and he has completely dominated us. So hopefully we can change that tonight. That would be cool. Luis Severino looking to bounce back a little bit from what happened in Seattle. Same thing goes for Sean Manaea as well, going up against Max Meyer, highly touted prospect. That is at 4 p.m. tomorrow. And then Paul Blackburn looking to bounce back after a really tough outing against his former team. That is on not the 15th. Again, these dates are wrong. Whoops. But whoops, 16th, 17th, and 18th. Those are where they are. That is going to be at noon, the final game of this series. So Manaea versus Munoz, Severino versus Mayer, Blackburn versus Bellazzolo. I think he was somebody who they acquired at the deadline. I'm not sure. But going into this series, we asked you guys in the poll. You guys make sure to vote right now saying, would you hit the panic button after an unsuccessful series versus the Marlins? 67% of you guys are saying yes. 15% of you are saying no. 18% of you are saying 50-50. You just don't know yet. So, we all know the Marlins have given us fits before, but the main keys to this series, what do you think, Frank, going into this one?
Yeah, I mean, how about not walk the ballpark? You know, I just feel like again when
Especially
you're
against
facing a
this team,
team,
jeez.
yeah, I mean you're facing a team that's 30 games under 500. You can't give them free passes. Like they're 30 games under 500 for a reason. They just don't have many good players. A lot of the guys they did have that were good, they got rid of. So I feel like you've got to just show me a different approach. You got to be more aggressive and just try to work the strike zone a little more because the way they've been trying to kind of skate by and get out of all these jams, it's just not going to work. You want to hopefully see Brandon Nimmo wake up finally. You'd want to see maybe Alvarez or JD Martinez get it going or something like that. That'd be great. But I just think overall, it's like, you can't lose another series. This time they can't split the Marlins, but you really just can't afford to lose another series against a team with such a bad record while you have like Baltimore, Arizona, and San Diego waiting right around the corner.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same for me going into this series. The key game I would say is actually just tonight. Again, when we talk about history just repeating itself, this Rodney Munoz guy has had our number, and as you can look at his just like face value numbers, I mean, this guy has been a 5.5 ERA pitcher his entire career, pretty much. So again, kind of just deframing that narrative of where the Mets just get carved up by guys who have not really had a good career or a good season or whatever. They have to lock in here. They really do. And the offense has to get going. And again, we talk about, guys like Starling Marte, we talked about in a second. I'm really hoping that Starling Marte is somebody who can maybe spark this offense a little bit, because that's kind of your last hope. Even though the Mets offense was fine in the Oakland series, it wasn't good. It still wasn't. They still scored runs. The Mets just need to really just find that consistency again, and hopefully they can just spark something to get themselves going again. Because right now you are at the brink. You are 2 games out of this wild card, and whether that looked like a good scenario at the end of June, right now in the current position you're in, where they have not been able to take advantage, they are really running out of time here. They're running out of bad teams to play or easy schedule guys to play. And I don't know how long that can last longer, because you have good teams coming up. After this Miami series, you have Baltimore. You will have also the Chicago White Sox coming up. Plenty of opportunities. And if you continue to waste them like they have in August, you're going to find yourself in some more deep shit. And I mean deep shit in the wild card race, as to where how we were talking in May, or how we were talking in the end of April, where our graphic was too big because the Mets were so behind so many teams. So, I mean, this is not going to get any easier. So enough with the playing down from opponents. They got to get their shit together. There's no real excuse. There's no, this team is too good. This team is way better. This team is just in a better position. They're red hot. This guy's injured, this guy's out, this guy's back. I don't want to hear that anymore. It's either you win or you don't. They have to go back to playing winning baseball, because they just have not been doing it in August, and it's just really continued to tax, just wasting away opportunities, as to where a lot of teams in front of them have been losing. They haven't been great, but also to rub salt into the wound, teams ahead of them as well. Arizona, San Diego, San Francisco has played better recently. They got to get it together. They have no excuse right now. Let's just say that. Frank, anything you want to add going into this series? I'm fed up. It's either get the job done or don't, because I'm done dancing around the fact that they should be winning these games.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's no excuse if they. Well, I mean, here's the really scary thing: if they get swept, they're 500. If they lose the series, they're a game above 500. So it really just shows you, just like you said, how close they are to like either being in it or getting very close to maybe being out of it. Like the Braves are just like a good series or two away from like you're just not in the picture. So it's a big moment for them. And that's the thing, like this is a big opportunity for them. Like this should be a good thing when you're facing a team that's 30 games under, but it is the Marlins, who will always play the Mets tough no matter how bad their record is. So it's just they like you said, there's no more excuse. They've just got to really show us. It kind of needs to be a sweep, honestly. Just with how it's gone with a lot of these series, they really just have to show up big time here.
Yeah. And to be honest, I understand that, You know, a lot of people like to be happy after they win games, and even if they do sweep the series, I'm still not going to be happy because that's what they should be doing. Like, that's what I mean. Like, just, you want me to, New York Post it and tell you that, yeah, you did your job. Like, I mean, they should be beating these teams. It just should be happening. And I'm getting fed up. I really am, because we have really started to get to this August slog where they just slog through August and September. Cut the shit where it's at right now. We know, like, they got to figure it out, and hopefully they do. And when they do, or if they don't, we will be live to recap that Marlins series. Maybe it's pivotal, maybe it isn't. Maybe the Mets win, maybe the Mets don't. But as for right now, thank you guys so much for watching, listening, tuning in for the entire stream if you did, maybe coming in for a little bit. For those of you who commented and joined the conversation for us, whether they were negative fighting words or they were agreeing with us, we appreciate all of them. We love talking baseball. Nothing is personal here. We just all are passionate fans that get very, very brutally honest, as we like to tag it here. And, that is something that, we just continue to go forward. I mean, if we see something we don't like, we're going to criticize. If we see something we like, we'll praise it. And it's very simple. It's very straightforward. And thanks for everybody that came in to tune in. And, of course, make sure to hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Turn on post notifications. We do this very podcast following every single series of games regularly. It is Sunday and Thursday, depending on how the games line up. The audio version dropping at 9 a.m. the following day. Make sure to follow Mets Weekly on TikTok and on X for Frank's post games after this game. He will be doing that after this game, which is about to start in an hour. Follow everyone individually. And also, one last thing. Let's go Mets. All right, let's play winning baseball again. We'll see you guys next time.